Hello, everyone. Welcome to this astrology stream for mid-late December 2018. So, if you're watching when this is not live, as always, fast forward until 5 minutes in. For the rest of you, we will begin very soon. Hello, Connor. Hello, whoever else is watching. I'm gonna make sure that we're good to go. And then I'll be right with you guys. So how do we look and sound? Okay, good. Hello, little laughing lug. So hope you guys are doing well today. Should be an interesting stream. We're gonna go through the astrology starting from today until the end of the month. What's the stream about? Basically that, giving an astrological overview that applies to everyone of all signs between now and the end of the month. And I'm just going to be looking at the most major or basic aspects, you could say. If we have time, like later on, I might, maybe we can get into more of the esoteric ones, but I'm at least going to look at the most basic ones to start with, the ones that really carry a lot of weight, I guess we could say. I might add this button still not working, but that's okay. We'll be beginning in 3 minutes. I'm live talking about astrology. Come join us. An exclamation mark could be like an enthusiastic tweet or something. So actually, you guys might have to forgive me if I'm a little bit out of it today because I'm in sort of a messed up vibration, but I'm still going to do the best I can to deliver this stream, and maybe even being live will get me more focused. We'll have to see. We are 2 minutes away from beginning. Yeah, so I'm just going to, as I mentioned in previous streams, I'm just going to kind of tell the story of the astrology from where we are until the end of the month, like going through it day by day. So unlike last time where I talked about mainly just specific aspects throughout the month, this time I'm going to just go from one day to another and try to tell the astrological story, tell the story of the astrological climate as we go. Because I feel like that gives you a much more concrete and holistic sense of what's going on, as opposed to just looking at individual aspects. So we will begin that in 1 minute. What happened with my vibrations? It's stuff that I don't really want to get into right now for various reasons, but I'm just, I'm not in the most positive emotional state, I guess you could say. Like, I know what to do, I know what needs to be done to fix it, basically, but, that can't be done right now. So I'm going to try to stay focused on being live right now and, deal with all that stuff later. Sorry to hear that. Thank you. Be beginning in less than 30 seconds. Right as I want to go live, freaking Dan Howell goes live on you now. So I'm missing Dan Howell and probably Phil too for you guys. So be happy. I'm just kidding. I'm happy to be here regardless, but I think that's a little funny and almost ironic. All right, we are at exactly 5 minutes in, and so let us begin. Which I guess I should have gotten this window where I needed it to be to begin with, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm a little scattered today. Just a few seconds. Which I might even pull some of this up on my tablet at times and actually show you guys what I'm looking at. But I don't know, we'll see how, I guess, relevant it ends up being. All right, we owe you one. Yes, Abir will get one. That could be quite nice. All right, so anyway, here we go. So again, I'm going to start with where we are right now. It is December 19th, 2018, 3:13 p.m. Eastern time, my time. So adjust that for wherever you are. I know with my UK viewers, I'm pretty sure it's 5 hours ahead there. So I think it's 8:13 p.m. where you are. But basically the astrology is the same. So just certain dates might be slightly different depending on where you are in the world and like what time things happen. So, but anyway, so again, I'm going to establish where we are, and then I'm just going to go forward one day at a time and tell the story and see, how the astrology evolves between now and the last day of the month. So, December 19th, 2018, now 3:14 p.m. The moon is currently in Taurus, giving us a significant amount of stability, and it's trining Pluto, and so there's this easier activation of the unconscious and powerful transformational things of that nature. Mercury is nearly conjunct Jupiter. That will perfect in just under 2 days. And so what's happening right now is our thoughts and mental activity and communication is getting emphasized a lot. It's being enlarged. Jupiter enlarges whatever it touches. To make this even more intense, they're both in Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's home sign, and Sagittarius is already about sort of enlarging and exaggerating everything. So our thoughts and mental processes are getting just hugely exaggerated right now. So is numerology useful as astrology? Is numerology as useful as astrology? I don't know. It's not as useful to me personally, but it is still something that I sort of look into. Right? I use the numbers of things to help determine things astrologically at the very least, and same with tarot. But let's see here. Now the sun is currently at the very end of Sagittarius at 2752 of Sagittarius, and so that energy of idealism and optimism and knowledge expansion, we can go far, we can do it, inspiration, the willingness to take action, to be spontaneous, that is all coming to an end very soon, and the sun does enter cold, hard, calculated Capricorn in just over 2 days from now, so the energy will shift significantly at that time into much more of that which is reality-based and fact-based and, make it real and that sort of thing. It's highly appropriate, by the way, that Christmas and New Year's take place during Capricorn season because Capricorn is the sign of completion. And speaking of numerology, it's the 10th sign, and 10s in tarot, at least. I guess this should apply to astrology too, I don't know, but whatever. 10s refer to the idea of completion. So, and then that implies starting something new. And so having like Christmas, something that I guess is very traditional, and well, we could go down a whole rabbit hole with that, but especially perhaps even more so New Year's during Capricorn season is most appropriate. So that's just kind of an aside. So as for more of the astrological weather, now we must remember that Venus is still in Scorpio, and that's after that planet completed its retrograde phase recently. And so Venus, I believe, is still moving over territory already covered. I believe Venus is still within her retrograde shadow. And so what that basically means is in our relationships, we are going back over territory already covered at this time. And I can look up exactly when Venus gets out of her retrograde shadow here in just a moment, but let me finish this about this planet. So while Venus is in Scorpio, our relationships are very intense, very all or nothing, intense passions. There's the risk of getting way too caught up in our passion, and so maybe some of that needs to be a bit tempered. Fortunately, what is happening right now is we just had, just over 3 days ago, Venus perfectly sextiling Saturn in Capricorn, and so some perhaps much needed stability has been brought to that area of our lives, but don't expect it to be, completely completely stable because Venus is still in the deep, dark, passionate sign that is Scorpio, and she's going to be there for a while yet. Let me see here. Not going to enter Sagittarius until almost 3 weeks from now. So for the next 2.5 weeks at least, our relationships are still going to have that deep intensity to them, or at least there's going to be a much greater predisposition to that. So let me burn and observe real quick, see if I can find out when specifically Venus went retrograde, and I can tell you then when Venus gets out of its retrograde shadow, or her retrograde shadow, however you want to put it. Actually, Venus might already be out of the retrograde shadow. I'm not sure. Let me see. Yeah, I stand corrected. Venus has been out of its retrograde shadow as of probably a couple of days ago. Hang on one second. Yeah, as of about 2 days ago, Venus has been out of her retrograde shadow. Right when, well, almost right when, really right after, but right after that sextile to Saturn perfected, interestingly enough. So I stand corrected. I apologize. Our relationship life is actually now experiencing new ground, new territory after finishing going over old ground about 2 days ago. So keep that in mind. Now I need a tissue real quick, so I'm going to be back in 30 seconds. All right, I'm back. Now let's keep going over the astrology of where we are. Let me see if I can fix that blur as well. Okay. So what else do we have? I already talked about Mercury's conjunction with Jupiter, so keep that in mind. It's not only are our feelings and stuff around relationships intense right now from being in Scorpio, intense and passionate, but our thoughts are intense but in a different way. They're really being amplified, and our communication is being amplified. Our logical thinking and maybe even sense of mischievousness, or I guess it's not a word, mischief, whatever. Maybe even an emphasis on technology. And we'll talk about that perhaps more in a little bit when we talk about the Sun-Uranus trine that's happening right now. Let me think what else. Just remember that, again, that Mercury-Jupiter thing is in Sagittarius, so it's a much more inspired, uplifting, positive thinking, we can do it kind of enlargement of our mental processes and communication. So with that out of the way, action hero Mars is currently swimming through the mystical waters of Pisces at 2149 of Pisces. And so Mars in Pisces, let me think of how I want to explain this. Well, Mars likes to have direction, right? Mars is all about taking action and is all about assertion and aggression, really likes to have direction. But in Pisces, Mars is directionless. Mars doesn't know where it's going in Pisces. And so it's like it has to trust its intuition. It has to trust its feelings, which Mars is not really comfortable with, right? Feelings are more the domain of, say, Venus especially. So Mars in Pisces, it's not the easiest thing, but it's like our willpower and sense of taking action and stuff like that is now much more tied to our emotions at this time, and probably much more intuitive. We may be more prone to acting on hunches at this time. And it's shrouded in emotional things, and maybe later in the stream we can get more into that if we have time, because that is quite the fascinating dynamic, Mars and Pisces, and it will align with Chiron, the wounded healer, in where are we here? In just under 1.5 weeks. So when Mars aligns with Chiron, we can expect a lot of willingness to take action in the direction of healing wounds, both our own and other people's. Or if you really want to get specific about it, healing other people's wounds so as to heal our own. That's in about, again, 1.5 weeks, or just under 1.5 weeks from now. That will perfect. In fact, why don't I just pull it up, actually. December 29th, 12:40 a.m. Eastern time, that perfects. So like the whole couple of days around December 29th, you can expect that energy to be highly active. So what else do we have here? Let's see, we already talked about, of course, Jupiter conjunct Mercury, but let's also remind ourselves here that Jupiter is indeed, as I've mentioned in previous streams, back in its home sign of Sagittarius at this time. And so, Jupiter's right at home in Sagittarius. All that optimism and idealism and positive thinking and everything else is being heavily emphasized right now, while, interestingly enough, Saturn has been back in its home sign of Capricorn for about a year now. And so these two are like opposite polarities, basically. And so at the same time, we're also being called to focus much more on reality and facts and limitation and making things real. Now that we're getting into the outer planets, these are more long-term influences, but it's important to talk about this now so that we can really set the stage for where we are astrologically before we attempt to describe where we're going. You're not going to understand where we're going if I don't first basically explain where we are. So, and I know for people who are students of astrology, this is probably stuff you already know, but it has to be said for those who need it. So now, before we get too much into the outer planets, though, let's see here. Well, I already mentioned the Sun being at the end of Sagittarius, and well, the Sun, as I briefly mentioned earlier, is about to perfectly trine Uranus, the planet of sudden shocking developments, that is currently retrograde in Aries. And that perfects in less than 24 hours, and actually less than 20 hours to be precise. We will have the Sun trine Uranus. So Sun trine Uranus, what does that look like? That looks like basically the ego harmoniously connecting with the part of us that is sudden, shocking, weird, or different. And so I think what is most likely when we have this aspect is sudden new insights, mental revelations, new realizations, even technological breakthroughs or insights, and really breakthroughs of all kinds, because Uranus is all about breaking down tension, and a trine is a harmonious aspect. And so when we have the Sun energizing the planet Uranus harmoniously in this way, we could expect positive breakthroughs of all kinds. Now, depending on the vibration you're in, these could also be, in some cases, negative or difficult or challenging breakthroughs, because basically speaking, though we like to think of trines and sextiles as positive and squares and oppositions as negative, really we're just talking about energy that is easier or more difficult to work with. And so when we're talking Sun trine Uranus, we're talking easier energy in this case to work with, getting our ego or sense of self in a connection with that which is different or shocking and unexpected, weird or technological, these sorts of things. But just because it's easier to work with doesn't mean it's always going to manifest as something positive. So, don't think you can use it as an excuse to not do your spiritual work or whatever. So what else do we have here? So I mentioned Saturn in Capricorn, where Saturn will remain until early 2020. So it's there to stay for quite a while. Jupiter will remain in Sagittarius for about another year. I believe it's the very end of 2019 that it leaves Sagittarius. Let me just fast forward here and see. Yes, by this time next year, Jupiter will be at nearly 4 degrees of Capricorn. So it's there to stay as well, but not as long as Saturn, of course. Jupiter stays in each sign for about 1 year, spends about 1 year per sign. And Saturn spends, I believe, about 2.5 years per sign. So let's see, with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about Uranus real quick. Again, just setting the stage here. As I mentioned, it's currently retrograde at the end of Aries. It did enter Taurus earlier this year on May 15th and moved back into Aries. I don't quite recall the date, but it was within the past month or two, I believe. And so we're seeing a return to some of the energy that we saw over basically the past 7 years, since about 2010, 2011, in the areas of our life that are Uranian. And so really we're talking about rebellion and stuff like that. Like, I don't know, like, as I remind people sometimes, I'm not an expert on this stuff by any means. So there are things that I don't know about. But with that said, when I think of Uranus and Aries, my interpretation of that is most commonly like rebellion, basically. And so when you think of the kind of rebellion we've seen around the world in the past 7 or so years, we're predisposed to seeing a return to that at this time. And that's going to remain the case until about the time that Uranus goes back into Taurus, which is, let me see if I have that here. Uranus back into Taurus. I do not have that here, but I think it's in March. Just 1 second. Yes, by early March of 2019. Looks like it's March 6th of 2019, Uranus moves back into Taurus. And so the energy will shift then to much more, earthy things, but we'll talk about that when we get to March. Basically, this is December. So we have that. Of course, I'll briefly mention these because they move so slowly. Neptune remains in its home sign of Pisces right now. And so we have, as we've had for many years now, this emphasis on consciousness and stuff like that. I heard it said recently that Neptune and Pisces, it's like now we have people that are either super spiritually awake or super not awake, which makes perfect sense because Neptune does indeed represent all the non-physical realms, but it also represents confusion and illusion and stuff like that. So just mentioning that briefly. Of course, Pluto still remains in Capricorn, where it will remain for years to come, bringing transformation to all things order and structure related, especially things like government and probably economic structures and stuff like that. But whatever, we're more concerned with the here and now. So just mentioning those briefly. So what else do we have? Looks like people are leaving. They don't want to hear about the outer planets. No, it's okay. Can I read your birth chart? If you want to stick around until the end of this forecast, the end of this material, I can read birth charts if you want. Wait, did that tarot I did for you help you? It was certainly insightful. It was interesting in the moment when I got that. It's like, yeah, it certainly makes sense. Gives me some stuff to look forward to. So I guess you could say it helped me. It's like, yeah, it was an accurate reflection of my life, I thought. Especially with, I think it was strength that I got for the outside force coming in. It's like, I'm going to need it. But anyway, so as for any significant aspects going on right now, before we start going more day to day, we do have the moon about to perfectly sextile Mars, and so we are very much predisposed at this time to taking action and stuff like that. You know, using our willpower, pushing through, asserting ourselves, stuff like that. And that's probably have that right here. That perfects at 7:41 p.m. Eastern time today. So in just over 4 hours. Let's see, now is there anything else I want to go over before we continue? Venus is moving into a perfect trine with Neptune that perfects in 1.9 days. And so right now, you know, that part of us that's all about relationships and our likes and dislikes and stuff like that is working harmoniously with nebulous Neptune, the spirit realms, the non-physical stuff, dreams, imagination, and stuff like that. And so we're looking at basically a love of fantasy right now. And we've all probably been feeling this energy on some level for probably at least a couple of days now. And we're going to feel it for at least a few more days, maybe even a bit longer, as Venus trines Neptune. So very interesting stuff there. So with that said, I think we can continue here. I will just mention one more thing. Mars is in a sextile with Pluto that just perfected almost 3 days ago now, so a couple of days ago. And that's going to really activate our, oh boy, our aggressive instincts, our survival instincts, you know, make us want to take action, you know, strong biological drives, sexual drives, assertive, aggressive things, you know. Pluto is a higher octave of Mars, and so their energies very much go together. So we have that active right now as well. But basically, the mood right now, if we were to simplify things, is one of relative stability, because the moon, which is our mood, the moon is in Taurus, very stable and earthy, but even though we have that stable backing, just remember, you know, we've got Venus in deep, dark, passionate Scorpio. We've got Mars in emotional, sensitive, psychic, intuitive Pisces. So, you know, we've got intense stuff going on. Oh, and let's not forget the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Sagittarius, putting a huge magnifying glass on our communication and mental realm. So even though we have the stable backing of the moon in Taurus, we also have these other influences currently and ongoing that are much more passionate and intense. So keep that in mind. Now let's see, what else do we have here? So at this point, I think it's appropriate for us to fast forward one day at a time. And I'll just, again, I'll explain the energy as it evolves between now and the end of December. I feel like we're starting to need some more light here. So if we go forward 24 hours into tomorrow, December 20th, the moon will have entered Gemini at, and well, this is funny, at 3:33 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, the moon is at 333 of Gemini. And so the mood is going to indeed shift to a much more playful one, much more intellectual, perhaps even somewhat detached one, with Gemini being an air sign. And that's just going to be emphasized further later in the day. Let me see if I can find out what time here approximately. Looks like it's really going to be about the next day. Let's see. Yeah, right around 1 a.m., December 21st, so very late tomorrow night, or somewhat late tomorrow night, 1 a.m. We will indeed have the moon in playful, intellectual Gemini in an opposition with Mercury, now nearly perfectly conjunct Jupiter in Sagittarius. So, expect both the 20th and the 21st, and especially like if you're a creature of the night or whatever, and you're awake later into the night, or whatever time it is where you are in the world, around 1 a.m. Eastern time, December 21st. Expect that to be a time where all of that mental activity is like extremely emphasized, kicked up a notch. And with this opposition, it could be in a bit of a stressful sense. We're basically talking on a very fundamental level, our emotions in conflict with our mind, and but not just that, but like also with our mind having this huge magnifying glass on it, which is Jupiter. And you could also say that Jupiter is enlarging our emotions as well, with it being involved in the opposition. So, but yeah, like that aside, I mean, how would I explain this? Extremely playful energy, detached, mental, technological, creative, perhaps even innovative, very interested in the flow of information and data, like all kinds of data, whether the information seems useful or not useful. So yeah, our minds are going to be buzzing like crazy tomorrow and the next day, especially, though they're already beginning to, because we already have Mercury and Jupiter nearly conjunct. And by the way, I guess that then sort of leads us into the next day, but that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction perfects on December 21st at 12:36 p.m. Eastern time. So yeah, December 21st, 20th and 21st, we're really going to be feeling that. But before we move on to the 21st, so let me see if there's anything else about the 20th that I want to get into here. The moon will quincunx the sun very early in the day, and so that might add some frustration to the mix, but that'll mainly be in the morning, at least again, relatively speaking, like for Eastern time. But then later in the day, that will give way, and it'll become much more about the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction opposed to the moon, or the moon. How would I even say that? The moon's opposition to Mercury conjunct Jupiter. I think there's an even better way of saying it that is escaping me. But before I move on, though, let me emphasize here about today, which I nearly forgot because it's like so close I didn't see it. We have perfecting at 5:02 p.m. Eastern time, the Sun square Chiron. And so, again, this is today. This is part of today's energy, but we'll be feeling it, probably for a couple more days or so. So this is basically our ego in conflict with the part of us that heals wounds, with a wounded healer, Chiron. And so this is a stressful connection between needing to heal wounds. And so what we're really looking at here is like the ego is not wanting to cooperate with the healing of wounds. And so maybe there's something that you need to say to someone in order to heal your own wounds, and it's going to be extra difficult today and in the next couple of days The ego's not going to want to do it. Or maybe you need to do some shadow work, but it's going to be extra difficult right now. The ego is not going to want to do it with this Sun Chiron square. Again, this is general for those who are already, more predisposed to such authenticity. It'll be easy enough to work with. It's a square, it's more difficult energy overall, but those who are accustomed to it will be able to work with it easily. By contrast, those who are unaccustomed to it will not be able to work with it so easily. So let's see here. Hello, Ascentium. Happy to have you here. So again, that was another thing we have going on today in just an hour and a half, literally. So brace yourselves, everyone. Actually, less than an hour and a half now. Brace yourselves. If you need to say something to someone in order to heal your wounds, then take it from me. You better do it. And or if you need to do some kind of shadow work or processing of trauma or whatever to heal your wounds, then you'd better do it. This would be an apt time. That would be a healthy way of harmonizing those energies rather than trying to escape into whatever. So let's see here. So again, we talked about the 20th and the playful energy that day, the frustration early on, but then that gives way to the playful energy that day. Let me just fast forward a bit here. So let's talk about now the 21st of December. So the moon is still in Gemini at this time. It will square Neptune and trine Venus at almost the same time. See if I can pull that up. Right around roughly 9 a.m. Eastern time, the moon will square Neptune and quincunx Venus. And so, indeed, at this time, Venus is extremely close to perfectly trining Neptune. So what we have here is basically the mood changing to one that is like, while it's still relatively playful and detached with the moon being in Gemini, well, now the moon's in a square with Neptune. And so there's this tension between our emotions and our imagination, or our emotions and dreams. It can make us prone to confusion and not seeing things clearly. And with the quincunx to Venus, that could involve frustration having to do with relationships, basically speaking. Again, really, I'm just going over the most basic and fundamental astrology in this stream, at least for now. Maybe we can get into some more deep stuff later. But, just for the sake of simple understanding, simple forecasting, not really wanting to get into the really complex stuff. Otherwise, I'd give you so many details you might not even remember much of what I said. So, indeed, by the 21st, we have that shift in energy. However, once we go a little later into the 21st, another key aspect of this day is that at 5:22 p.m., the sun moves into Capricorn, as I mentioned earlier. And so, indeed, the 21st, we're going to go from that inspirational, optimistic, idealistic energy or mood of Sagittarius and into cold, hard, calculated Capricorn, which is all about reality and facts and let's make it real. We're going to have that at 5:22 p.m. Eastern time on December 21st. So there will be a significant shift in the energy then as well. And remember, the sun is still trying to Uranus retrograde in Aries at this time. So there's still the potential for breakthroughs, insights, unexpected things happening, intense mental revelations, things of this nature. The moon will also be moving into a quincunx with Pluto at this time. So like into the evening on December 21st, again, Eastern time, we're looking at this this frustration with the unconscious drives, with transformation, with biological drives, and things like this. some frustration in that area. So what else do we have here? And also keep in mind, well, December 21st has a lot going on with it. Keep in mind that Venus does perfectly trine Neptune that day. That trine perfects that day, as does the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction. And in fact, well, this is crazy. Venus trine Neptune perfects at 12:10 p.m. and Mercury conjunct Jupiter perfects at 12:36 p.m. So, you know, there's a lot going on the 21st. That's going to be a very dynamic day. I'll put it that way. So, a love of fantasy and dreams and stuff like that with Venus trine Neptune, and also a huge magnification of our mental world and communication with Mercury conjunct Jupiter. And since Jupiter also relates to our dreams, maybe even a tie-in there as well to like thinking about a lot about our dreams, you know. December 21st could be a very dreamy day, at least until the sun enters into Capricorn later on, which then it becomes more serious. Interestingly enough, the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction itself is square to Neptune that day on the 21st. So, how should I even put this? Again, it's like our mind in conflict with our dreams and the fantasy realms and stuff like that, but the goal would be to harmonize those that day if you can. So, you know, get your mind to work cooperatively with your dreams would be the goal that day. Now, as for the 22nd, let's keep moving right along here. This is very interesting. This is where we have the full moon. And the moon has just entered Cancer on the 22nd, and the full moon perfects around just before 1 p.m. Eastern Time, December 22nd. Now, it's a full moon in Cancer, so that's going to really emphasize our need for security and self-protection, the inner world, the private world, needs, wants, desires, emotions, deep emotional meaning, stuff like that. Remember that a full moon in astrology, all that is when the moon opposes the sun, when they're at opposite ends of the sky from Earth's perspective. And so, of course, the sun has just entered Capricorn, as I mentioned, and the moon just enters Cancer. So the energy is going to go from, you know, all this like playfulness and stuff and focusing on dreams and stuff like that to a much more like deep emotional vibe on December 22nd. And yes, with it being a full moon, we're not talking emotional stability, we're talking emotional instability, if anything, or much greater difficulty in finding emotional stability, which is basically every full moon, what we see every full moon. And Cancer is the moon's home sign, so you know, the moon will be swimming through its own natural energies as we come upon this full moon. So expect emotions to be intense on the 22nd, although we do at least get some stability from the sun just having recently entered Capricorn. But I can almost guarantee that for the majority of people, they'll be feeling more predisposition to emotional instability than stability. I can virtually guarantee that, just from seeing how these things tend to go. So that's the 22nd. At this time, Mercury is now past Jupiter, but still basically conjunct Jupiter. So our mental world is still being fairly magnified at this time. Moving on to the 23rd. Now we have a very interesting dynamic where the moon is right in the middle of Cancer, and we have a grand water trine, which we've had like a lot of this year, especially since I think about June. And it's between the moon, Venus, and Neptune. And I guess it's a fairly common thing, by the way, for these grand water trines to kind of, or these grand trines of any kind to like sort of travel, you know, for them to recur in groups like this. That's definitely what we've seen this year, from what I've seen. So So the moon is in Cancer, Venus is in Scorpio, and Neptune is, of course, in Pisces. And we can't really say exactly when this perfects because we're talking, 3 different objects, but um, Neptune is at almost 14 of Pisces. It's at 1356 of Pisces around this time. Venus is at 1538 of Scorpio. So the moon gets about right between them at roughly like 11 a.m., 12 p.m. in that general area. So when we have a grand water trine, we're talking the element of water. So we're talking emotion, all things emotional. We're talking a lot of easy energy to work with, but that in and of itself can become problematic. And as an aside here, I will have you guys know that for me personally, it seems anytime there's a grand water trine, I actually have a difficult time emotionally rather than a harmonious one. Like, I'm not sure why that is, but that's what we have. So it really depends on your unique energy and stuff like that. Did I do Aries yet? Well, I'm not giving forecasts for each individual sign. I'm giving an astrological overview. So we're not doing that here, but maybe we could look into that later on if we have time. Really, we're just looking at the overall energy for the entire world. So let's see. So this grand water trine perfecting basically on December 23rd could be a highly emotional day. We all might be feeling fairly moody and stuff like that. Thanks, you're welcome. Wait, I had 100 matches for dudes online. Wait, what does that mean? Like 100 matches? Like, I don't get it. Is that like on a dating site or something? But so again, with this grand water trine, especially also with the moon in Cancer, we could be feeling very moody that day. And that's, for some reason, that's how I tend to feel during grand water trines, I'll have you know. It's very interesting how that works. Like, the way I've heard this explained is that a grand trine, the danger in it is that it can be like a self-contained circuit. And so we can actually use it as a means of escapism rather than looking at things that we need to look at. So that's the risk around that time, December 23rd. Don't fall into the trap of escapism. Try to give reality the honor that it is due. Now, we sort of have what is called a kite in this scenario also. Like, it's not exact because we have to back up a bit to sort of get it, but like, we have in a grand trine turns into a kite when one of the 3 objects involved is also involved in an opposition to another planet. And I'm going to pull this up on my tablet in a bit so I can show you guys exactly what I mean, because otherwise this might not entirely make sense, but like if you're new to this. But basically what we have here on December 23rd is that early in the day, the moon will be opposite Saturn in Capricorn, so cold, hard, calculating Saturn. And then, this is very interesting and kind of weird, but not entirely unusual. Later in the day, the moon will then be opposite Pluto in Capricorn. So we almost have like a double kite on December 23rd. Very interesting indeed. And so what does that do? Well, I'm not an expert on kites, but I can tell you that when we have the moon opposite Saturn, there's going to be a challenge in basically facing reality, and also in doing the things that we know we need to do but don't necessarily want to do, in disciplining ourselves, in having like proper behavior throughout the day or whatever. That's going to be a very significant challenge at that time. Am I doing Virgo? I am just giving the astrological overview for people, for all signs. I'm not doing individual signs, though we might at the end of the stream, so I apologize. So when the moon opposes Pluto, though, later that day, it will, of course, shift. The energy will shift, and then it will be more, conflict and tension between our emotions and all the deep, dark stuff that Pluto represents. And so anything having to do with transformation, having to do with the unconscious, having to do with the biological drives, including sexual drives, having to do with power dynamics, Again, this is all basically contained to the 23rd. So, this is just one day in our sort of story here. But yeah, it's very like dynamic, interesting energy on the 23rd. Let's see. Again, I have to remind people I'm not looking at individual signs. I do apologize. I'm only doing an astrological overview today for people of all signs. So I'm going to pull this up on my tablet, though, so I can show you guys exactly what I mean by this kite. So give me just a little bit here. Where are we even at? You're drunk, Connor. You do like that the drink, don't you? You do like alcohol, don't you? Let's see. Let's pull up planetwatcher.com. That's the website I'm on, people, by the way. And we're going to go to December 23rd. He's addicted at this point. Oh dear. Connor, you are deeply under the influence of Neptune at this time, if you want to put that in astrological terms. Neptune rules drugs and alcohol. All kinds of substances like those, basically. So let me think how I want to show this exactly. Let's just go back. Oh, shit. Sorry, everyone. It's weird when I do this on my tablet. Doesn't quite want to cooperate with me. I'd share my screen and all that good shit, but I don't have the technology to do that. Just gonna have to do this one at a time. Okay, that's close enough to make my point, basically. Okay. I'm a character, but I'm not an alcoholic poetic. There's no drunks in Ireland. Ah, well, good to know. It has been too long since I've consumed alcohol, especially on days like today. But anyway, so hopefully you guys can understand what I'm about to show you if you're new to astrology. And I'll try to point it out like while it's on a mirror image on my screen. So if I use my other hand. So if you can see here, we have Neptune in Pisces, that green symbol that looks like a trident, that's Neptune, and that's in the sign of Pisces. You can see it trining Venus in Scorpio, which I'm kind of pointing to. Venus, like that female symbol in Scorpio, the light blue symbol right there. You can see their trine. And you can see how they're also trine to the moon down here, which is pretty obvious. Just look for the symbol of the moon. You can see that grand water trine, right? Now, we have a kite because the moon, look at the moon, everyone, down here, is also opposite Saturn in Capricorn, which is that brown symbol right there near the sun, which is pretty obvious what the sun is, I think. So it's opposite Saturn, right? And this is early in that day. So that's a kite. And why is it a kite? Because it ends up looking like a literal kite when you put it together. If you look at the grand trine itself, and then you look at what is formed by the opposition, it's basically a kite. And also what happens here in this dynamic is that the additional planet being opposed also forms a sextile with the two others, as you can see. So Saturn here is sextiling Venus and also sextiling Neptune. But the thing that, of course, makes December 23rd so interesting is that, again, as I mentioned, if we fast forward, let's just, what the hell is this thing doing? Fast forward like 12 hours, I'll just switch this to PM. Then we, in fact, have a kite again, but a new kite this time, with the opposing planet being Pluto in Capricorn. So you can see it right there. Look at the moon at the bottom of the screen here in Cancer still, 18 of Cancer, opposite Pluto at 20 of Capricorn. I'm looking at this as a mirror image on my screen right now. So fortunately, I can still make sense of this, I guess. So yeah, we have a double kite on December 23rd. Very interesting dynamic that day. So that's what I mean. See, like, if I tried to explain this, just talking about it, it would be extremely difficult to understand, but giving you guys a visual representation it's much better. It makes it so much easier to explain. Thanks for bringing it up on a tablet. Makes it feel more immersive. My point exactly. You are very welcome. The moon looked at you funny. Things like that can happen when you begin to see into the other realms represented by Neptune. So let's see here. Is there anything else that I need to talk about that day before we move on? I don't think so. Okay, then let's look at the 24th of December. The moon shifts into bold, dramatic, fiery, inspirational Leo just before 12 p.m. Eastern Time, like 11:58, 11:59 a.m. probably. And it does so very soon after trining Chiron and aligning with the North Node. So what does this mean, basically? Well, also does so after trining Mars, but that would be a while back. Very simply put, the way I would interpret this is we would be in the mood to work more with our unhealed wounds. Again, the Chiron thing. The alignment with the North Node in Cancer, have things flowing more easily that day, things like that. Now there's a square to Uranus, so there could be some, tension in there, perhaps some rebellion or like, the need for freedom, potentially causing problems. But basically the mood on December 24th, early on, it's still emotional as the moon is in moody, deep emotional meaning, self-protective Cancer. But then it moves into bold, dramatic, daring, passionate Leo just before 12 noon Eastern Time. So that's what we have there. What else that day? Let me see. The moon will quincunx the sun, so there might be some frustration, in our mood and getting our sort of emotions to cooperate with our ego, but that's relatively minor. What else on December 24th? Well, it looks like Mercury is now about to perfectly square Neptune that day. Yes, it is 7:31 p.m. Eastern Time, December 24th. So Christmas Eve, for those of you who celebrate, we have Mercury, our mind, in a square in conflict with Neptune, our dreams and imagination. And so, oh boy, how do I put this? This could make us prone to all kinds of mental delusion and confusion, not seeing things clearly, messages becoming blurred, things not being clearly defined. And so, Christmas Eve, like, I don't know, for those of you who like celebrate that and there's like family get-togethers and stuff like that, be on the lookout for a lot of potential misunderstandings that evening, stuff like that. But on the positive side, if you can work successfully with this energy, then Mercury square Neptune can be like magical, and it can put us in a mental state of reaching for our dreams and stuff like that. Give the whole mood on Christmas Eve a magical, mystical feeling, especially in a mental sense. Then with the moon being in Leo, it's also going to have a more like dramatic sense, but not dramatic in a negative way per se, though. I don't mean it like that. I mean just, dramatic, showy. So we have that. And what else? Again, I'm not wanting to offend anyone, but I just have to find it, I just can't help but find it slightly amusing that we keep having people coming in here basically just wanting their fortunes told for what sign they are, which is fine. That's perfectly authentic or that's perfectly like acceptable to want that. I've checked out stuff like that before, but I just think it's funny that people assume that's what this is about. But anyway, that's a Mercury square Neptune thing. That's Mercury square Neptune. Is that kind of confusion, except I guess it's Mercury square Neptune every day on my live streams, but it's okay, it's all right. Or at least on those having to do with astrology and tarot, I should say. Now, also keep in mind that by this time on December 24th, Mercury is moving out of its conjunction with Jupiter, or you could even say it has moved out of it by this point. So we're gonna, by this time, begin to get like a bit of a rest from having our mental world so heavily magnified and stuff like that. Maybe we'll feel more mentally at ease, relatively speaking. But then the Neptune thing is just gonna make us prone to potential confusion and stuff like that. So we're not out of the God, how do I say this accurately? We're not out of the reflective magnification yet by December 24th, because how do I simplify this? Jupiter expands and expands and expands, but can never expand past the limit of Saturn. You can think of Neptune, however, which is outside the orbit of Saturn, as basically Jupiter without the limitations of Saturn. Neptune expands and expands and expands infinitely. And so really what we have is Jupiter like being more about magnification and Neptune being about reflection. But you could also say to some extent that Neptune is about magnification as well, because if it's going to reflect something, it can't help but magnify it. So it's like we go from Mercury conjunct Jupiter, so that magnification of our mental world and stuff like that, to Mercury square Neptune. So another kind of magnification of our mental world. It's just this time it's much more of a reflection by December 24th. So it's kind of funny how that works. Now, I have heard the theory that when we have a stressful aspect from a planet to Neptune, as we do in this case, Mercury square Neptune, that basically the negative aspects of the planet being reflected are what gets reflected. So in this case, when we have Mercury square Neptune, we're not going to have like, dreams and imagination so easily within reach. We're going to have, what are the negative aspects of the mind? Overthinking things, mental fatigue, or too much data, too much information. That would almost be more of a Mercury Jupiter issue, but we could possibly have that with Mercury Neptune as well. And again, the potential for confusion and delusion and stuff like that. So let's see, December 24th. Is there anything else that day? Doesn't really look like it. Okay, so now we're going to go to Christmas Day, December 25th, with the moon still in Leo. So the moon's still in Leo, it's going to have our mood being all about being bold and dramatic and showy and all that kind of stuff. So quite appropriate for Christmas in many ways, or at least, I guess, I don't know, the commercialization aspect of Christmas, perhaps. Like, expect this Christmas, whether you're celebrating or not, expect that day to be one that is very bold and intense, out in the open, really doing a lot to show what can be done. Leo is ruled by the sun, and the sun is associated with the ego, and thus, therefore, Leo is associated with the ego. And the ego is always wanting to be like, look what I can do, and stuff like that. We see this a lot in like children. Not that Leo is childlike per se. I don't know, like it's in other things, but like, imagine the young child who was like, look what I can do, when they go through that phase. Imagine that kind of energy being what we have on Christmas Day this year, like the whole world more or less relatively in that mood, especially as that Leo moon is in a trine early in the day, but lasting throughout the day with, again, Jupiter that just magnifies everything. So Jupiter's just turning that up even higher. And then, as if that's not enough, the moon also trines Mercury, and it does this very soon after 12 p.m. Eastern time. And so that's going to harmoniously activate our mental processes, our mental world. So, and also our communication. So expect this Christmas it to be, lots of bold communication taking place. It's going to be that kind of a Christmas, a very showy, like dramatic Christmas this year. So people can look forward to that. Let's see what else. Now, that's all like positive stuff about that day. On the downside, the moon will square Venus that day, and that will perfect later on more in the evening hours, again, Eastern time. And so that could make for some potential relationship tension, basically speaking. And since Venus is our likes and dislikes, I don't know, the theme of Christmas, it will almost be like people might get some gifts that they aren't necessarily pleased with. But I don't know, I wouldn't say that is extremely likely, but I mean, it's there, the energy's there. Then the moon is also quincunx to Neptune, so there might be a little bit of sort of emotional frustration or confusion involved, but probably not too much. And remember, Mercury is still in that square with Neptune at this time, even though it's moving out of it. So there's still the potential for confusion on Christmas Day. So it's going to be like one big, bold, dramatic, showy, but also potentially mentally confusing day. So, Merry Christmas, I guess. Moving on. Wait, do I want a free tarot? I don't know. I don't know if I have any questions right now. If I think of a question, I'll let you know. But going to the day after Christmas, the moon will go from bold, dramatic Leo that day to very calculating, precise, earthy, practical Virgo that day. And that will happen right around just before 1 p.m. Eastern time. So that's how the energy will shift that day. That'll be the mood of it. The moon will trine Uranus. There may be some insights and stuff like that day. Interestingly enough, we're moving into another grand trine when this happens. But that's sort of far apart, but not exactly. I don't know. It's like basically what's happening is the moon is straddling, if you will, this grand trine that also involves Uranus at the end of Aries, and the Sun now at 454 of Capricorn, or like roughly 4 or 5 degrees of Capricorn, depending on when we look at it that day. So let me see here. How do I even explain this? This is a weird sort of grand trine because we can't pin it down to any one element, because what we in fact have is both the moon and Saturn in earth signs, Virgo and Capricorn, but Uranus in a fire sign, Aries. And so I don't even know if there is a name for these, but if I were to call it something, I guess I'd call it a grand fire earth trine, or a grand earth fire trine, because that's basically what it is. And I can pull this up on my tablet as well to show you specifically what I'm talking about. So what do we have when it's the moon, the sun, and Uranus? Well, and it's a grand trine. Well, we have all kinds of insights, and sudden like mental revelations and stuff like that. There's also the possibility for like unexpected developments. But again, when I see energy like this, like when we're talking like trines to Uranus, it just seems, from my experience anyway, to be more to do with mental breakthroughs and breakthroughs in general, stuff like that. But it can be other Uranian things, perhaps even rebellion and stuff like that. But let's go to December 26th. And let's go to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Zoom out slightly. Okay. So what we have here, let me see, how should I hold this? What we have here, and again, I'm looking at this backwards, so bear with me, is the moon at the very beginning of Virgo in a trine with Uranus at the end of Aries, and let's see if I can get that to focus. There we go. In a trine with Uranus at the end of Aries, and also in a trine with the Sun at 457 of Capricorn. And so, do you see what I mean? How the moon is just kind of straddling the two of them to form a grand water trine, because Uranus is all the way, at 28 of Aries, and the Sun is at 4, almost 5 of Capricorn. They're kind of far from a perfect trine, basically. Well, no, they are far from a perfect trine. But with the moon in between them, we kind of have that going on. And so again, there's this risk for like escapism and stuff like that. But again, with this being the moon, the Sun, and Uranus, I mean, those energies cooperating together, it's like mental breakthroughs, or breakthroughs of other kinds, perhaps. Mental, emotional breakthroughs, perhaps, with the moon talking about our emotions. So that's what we have for December 26th. So let's see what else there is. If there's anything else that day. Don't want to miss anything. Also, let us keep in mind at this time that Mars is getting closer and closer to Chiron. So by 2 p.m. December 26th Eastern Time, Mars is at 26 of Pisces, Chiron is at 28 of Pisces. And so we're getting closer and closer to the peak of that feeling of being willing to act on the healing of our wounds, basically speaking, to really simplify that, using willpower to heal ourselves. We're getting closer and closer. That energy is getting louder and louder by December 26th. So that's going on. What else? At this time, Venus is also getting closer and closer to a sextile with Pluto. And so how do I see that? Well, I feel like it can manifest in many different ways, but a love of that which is deep and dark and hidden and transformational in nature. So take that to mean, whatever you want it to mean. It can be a psychological thing, especially with Pluto, or it can just be anything that fits into that category, basically. So that energy is also building up at this time. So I think we see a bit of a theme here, don't we? We see Mars getting closer and closer to activating Chiron, involving the healing of wounds, and we see Venus getting closer and closer to sextiling Pluto, which can be all about the unconscious and stuff like that. Which, where do you think our unhealed wounds reside? In our unconscious or subconscious. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic. It'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. And furthermore, at this time, speaking of things inching along, the sun is getting closer and closer to aligning with Saturn, which we'll get to more of that when that happens. And this is much slower, but still, Jupiter is getting closer and closer to squaring Neptune, which can make us prone to basically too much of a good thing, among other things. So that's what we have there. Explain this to a simpleton. What's your question? Like, what part? What are you mainly wanting to know? Let's see. So on the 27th, moving on here, we have the moon now basically right in the middle of Virgo. You don't understand this? Well, I think I'm explaining it probably about as simply as I can at this point, though it can be fairly complicated stuff. I don't know. You can always rewatch the stream, and that will help a lot. But basically, like, if you're wondering like what the mood will be overall, there's going to be a lot of emphasis towards the end of December on, I would say, the healing of wounds and on deep psychological drives. Like, if I really had to try to oversimplify it, that's probably what I would say. But so on December 27th, indeed, we have the moon now in the middle of Virgo. So our mood is still very practical and analytical, getting all the good information. But the interesting thing that happens here is that the moon then opposes the energy that is the very opposite of Virgo, which is Neptune and Pisces. And so we have this conflict between our emotions that basically are wanting to gravitate towards that which is analytical, precise, detailed, clear, clear as can be, absolute, like laser precision. That is the energy of Virgo. We have all of that in conflict with that Neptune and Pisces, which is all about the exact opposite. Dissolving things, the nebulous realms, the spirit realms, the non-physical realms, the dreams and imagination. Things that are completely intuitive and psychic and subjective. So I guess really an oversimplification here would be like, you could almost look at it as objectivity versus subjectivity, but even that is not actually saying what's happening, but it's like that. It's the same sort of principle. Again, this is December 27th. That's what we're looking at that day. And then the moon, let's see, the moon also forms like a bunch of aspects with other planets here. Let's see, just what is it doing? Geez, it sextiles Venus, squares Jupiter, squares Mercury, trines the Sun, trines Saturn. Actually, trine the Sun more like very, very early in the day, if not the day before, and trines Pluto. Oh boy. How do I put all this? That's a tough one. I don't know. There's going to be so much energy activated on the 27th. Expect things to be all over the place, I guess, in that area. But the general mood will still be that analytical, Virgoan, practical mood on the 27th. But the potential for that being in conflict with the part of us that is more subjective or emotional is like huge that day. So let us continue. Let's make sure I'm not missing anything here. Okay, yes, let us continue to the 28th. Now on the 28th, the moon is at the very end of Virgo by 12 p.m. Eastern Time. It's at precisely, however, going 28 degrees of Virgo at 12 noon that day. Now, what's interesting about this is that it is in an opposition with Mars now nearly perfectly conjunct Chiron in Pisces. And so, how do I explain this dynamic? So, first of all, Mars conjunct Chiron is like we're getting ready to act on healing our wounds, and the moon being in an opposition to that is our emotions not exactly wanting to go along with that, not exactly wanting to go along for the ride, so to speak. So let's see here. So it's a very interesting dynamic that perfects that day. And, healing of wounds is going to be significant on the 28th, I bet. Or at least the potential is there. Can I do a tarot for you? Well, I'm not doing tarot readings at this time. I'm only doing an astrological overview in this stream. But if we have time at the end, once we get through the material, I can do tarot readings if you would like to stick around. So we have that, again, right around 12 p.m. on the 28th Eastern Time. But then the moon does shift into Libra right around 3:30 or so on the 28th. So the mood that day is going to go from being all analytical and practical to being much more diplomatic and seeking of balance and harmony, also detached and intellectual, which is funny because if your unhealed wounds involve other people, all of a sudden later in the day, it's like you're willing to be more diplomatic about it and stuff like that, Or this could just be a passing day for you and you find it doesn't really apply to you. Because that can happen too, I should note here. But this is, again, the overall energy for the planet. What else can we say about that, though? There was something else I was going to say about that. What was it? I think it was, if your healing of your wounds is much more of an individual thing, then the moon moving into Libra, it could still benefit you because of the detachment involved and being able to see things more objectively. But I see this really benefiting those that are in any kind of, perhaps, I don't know, anything involving talking to other people about unhealed wounds, basically, and like acting on it specifically, because this is Mars conjunct Chiron. Which there was still something else I wanted to say. What was it? Well, you guys, it's just not coming to me right now, but hopefully it does. So we have that on December 28th. And then we have, I believe that same day, yes, at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Speaking of relationships, Venus sextiles Pluto. That finally perfects. And again, that's like the love of all things deep and dark, including like unconscious processes and stuff like that. And so I don't know, what more can we say about that? So we have that Libran moon detachment, but we also still have Venus in Scorpio sextiling Pluto in Capricorn. That part of us that's about relationships is like still very passionate, but the moon in Libra should help us see it from a more detached perspective and more perhaps objective or quote unquote objective perspective. So let me see if there's anything else. I know there's one more thing I wanted to say about that Chiron thing, and it's driving me crazy because I can't quite remember what it was. But anyway, let's just move on. So as for the rest of the 28th, I don't think there's anything else. Let me just see here. Except for, well, technically on the 29th at 12:40 a.m. Eastern Time, we have Mars aligning with Chiron. That finally does perfect. And so, again, we're talking action in the area of healing of wounds. And we're going to experience this most strongly, I would say, on the 28th and 29th of this month. Wait a second. From an astrological perspective, how would you say New Year's Eve is looking? Well, we will be getting to that very soon. And it is looking quite interesting. And what's this stream about? It's New recommended. Am I doing readings for Gemini? I am not doing readings. I am going over the overall astrological energy of the second half of December 2018. I am not doing readings. So let's see. As for the rest of the 29th, we still have the moon in Libra, so we're still from that sort of like balanced or like detached perspective. That day it sextiles Mercury, so it sextiles Jupiter. Sextiles Jupiter, so there's going to be an element of positive thinking. It squares the Sun, then it squares Saturn, so some potential inner conflicts, some potential conflicts with order and structure that day. You know, these are relatively minor things, but they are there. But overall, yeah, that Libran moon, you know, when the moon's in Libra, we're usually talking like relatively easy energy to work with, you know, sweet, easy, delightful energy, you know, Libra ruled by Venus, which is all sweet and loving and stuff like that. So that's what we have on the 29th. Let's see. Now, remember at this time, the Sun is getting extremely close to aligning with Saturn, the Sun being at almost 8 degrees of Capricorn and Saturn being at 11 degrees of Capricorn. And when the Sun aligns with Saturn, we're going to be talking about a huge emphasis on things like reality, order and structure, discipline, limitation. We might even see as the Sun aligns with Saturn, justice for something, for multiple things, for things in the wider world and things in our own personal lives, basically. And so that, again, that's building up around this time by the 29th of December. Mars, of course, is still aligned with Chiron, but now past it and is working its way towards Aries, but is still in Pisces. So still very emotional in that area. What else? Let's see here. Okay, let's go to the 30th now. Yes, Jot, this is an astrology stream. We're giving the forecast for the second half of December. So on December 30th, the moon is still in Libra, so we're still in that, like, balanced, harmonious, sweet, loving energy. But now it's going to move into Scorpio, but hang on, before we go there, it squares Pluto early in the day, so there might be some tension and like deep psychological drives and stuff like that. And let's see, what else should we talk about? Well, I'm just going to try to find the time that it gets into Scorpio, which is going to be around 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, like right around that time anyway. Wait, can I do this? Ghost. Can I be a ghost? I don't get it. Do you believe that Skyrim belongs to the Nords? Probably, but I feel like the Empire makes a lot of important points as well, so I don't know, I'm kind of divided on the issue. Can't tell if these people are trolls or not. Yeah, I don't know. Hello, Natalie. Welcome. So anyway, on December 30th, around 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, the moon shifts into passionate, deep, dark, intense, investigative Scorpio. And so the mood's going to go from being all like sweet and like easy to work with and detached and more mental and objective and stuff like that to be much more passionate and deep and dark and things like that. Scorpio is basically the darkest sign of the zodiac. But that shift will take place again late in the day on December 30th, around 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. And let's see, what else? The moon will quink Unx, that ongoing Mars-Chiron conjunction, so there might be some frustration in that area of like unhealed wounds and whatever, but that's, beginning to fade at this point. The moon will oppose Uranus right before moving into Scorpio, or very soon before moving into Scorpio. So we're talking like just before 6 p.m. Eastern time that day. And when the moon opposes Uranus, expect the unexpected, which I guess is a bit of a cop-out for astrologers, because then it's like whatever happens, you end up being right. But I'm just calling it like I see it. It's the idea of that which is very weird and unusual being much more likely to happen the evening of December 30th. Wait, do you believe that in easy life working with different unhuman energies? Not quite sure what you're asking. Could you be more specific, perhaps? And let's see if we have anything else around this time. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so now we will get to Little Laughing Lug's question. We are, at long last, at the last day of our forecast here, December 31st. So, like mediums, demons, / angels, that in easy life working with different unhuman energies. Like are you asking if I think that life can be easy if you work with such entities? I don't know. I think it would largely depend on the entity, I guess. I mean, for some people it makes their lives a lot easier, but then a lot of people also seem to enter into a sort of spiritual bypassing from a number of channels out there, I've noticed. So, yes, then answer is no. That's basically accurate, yeah, because it can be yes or no in that instance. So, December 31st, the moon is now fairly well into Scorpio, and so New Year's Eve is looking to have that very deep, dark, passionate vibe, essentially, very intense, all or nothing and stuff like that. What else can we say about this? Mars does eventually move into Aries that night, but we'll get to that in a moment. It's interesting because the moon will sextile the sun as it is getting extremely close to perfectly aligning with Saturn in Capricorn. And so, see if I can find kind of when it's in the middle of that. And that should be most intense roughly around 4 p.m. Eastern time that day. So the moon sextile the sun conjunct Saturn, well, we're going to be talking about order and structure and discipline and all that getting significantly activated. But I think, see, here's the thing though, this is New Year's Eve. And so I think when we're talking the energy of New Year's Eve, it's going to be much more about really sticking with tradition, right? Because Saturn is all about tradition as well, as is Capricorn. And so, and of course, the moon is sextiling it. That's easier energy to work with. The sun is aligning with it. That's energizing it as well. And so I would say, first of all, at least on this side of things, it's going to be a much more like traditional New Year's Eve, where that which is real and true is very much activated. With, again, the Sun-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn and the moon transiting Scorpio. But then what's really interesting, however, is there's a bit of a caveat to this, because that'll be the energy up until a point that day. But at exactly 9:19 p.m. Eastern time that night, Mars enters its home sign of Aries. And so the energy is going to pick up at that time and become much more impulsive and action-packed and willful and aggressive and stuff like that. So it's an interesting mix, right? It's an interesting mix. So, like, again, this is going to depend on like where you are in the world, but generally speaking, any like sort of late night New Year's Eve parties, well, once we cross the point where Mars moves into Aries, expect those parties to get much more wild. Still working with that traditional energy of Sun conjunct Saturn, sextile Moon and Scorpio, but the wildness and intensity and assertiveness and aggressiveness of Mars infused into that, I would say. So yeah, it's going to be a traditional and wild New Year's Eve all at the same time. But it's going to be traditional up until 9:19 p.m. Eastern time. And then things are going to shift into being more wild. So, do we have anything else here before we move on? No, that's basically it. At that time, Venus is still in Scorpio, so our relationships will remain in that intensity and passion. Mercury is still in Sagittarius. Our thoughts will remain all about that which is idealistic and optimistic and imaginative and we can do it kind of mentality. And Mars just moved into Aries. Some sign, action, assertion, aggression, willpower. So that's basically it. Perhaps we could go over some additional things if I locate them here. But that is it for the crux of this stream. So I'm going to take a brief break real quick and then come back and I'll take any questions on this material. Like, I'm not doing readings right now, but on this material. And after that, well, we'll see what we have time left for. And I'll also look and see if there's any other relevant things I'm going to pull up about January, perhaps. Thanks for the analysis. You are welcome. Are you being possessed by the Irish drinking demon? I wouldn't be able to answer that. Alright, you guys, I'm back. So, first of all, like there will be some additional aspects that occur in early January that are quite interesting, and I feel like they're worth talking about. But does anyone have any questions on the material before we go there? On the astrology of mid-late December 2018. I wonder if I could sum it up. I don't know, that Mars Chiron thing made it about a lot about the healing of wounds, I guess. It's going to be like, I think, a significant factor. But also, I don't know, all this activation of Mercury, there's going to be a lot of communication and mental activity going on, some of it clear, some of it unclear, and then Venus transiting Scorpio, or relationships, that area of our lives is going to remain deep and intense and passionate and all or nothing. Let's see. Little laughing lug, you read my mind. I didn't even read that comment. And then I went to summarize it. So yeah, that's what I would say. You read my mind. What are you doing, Gemini? Well, I'm not doing readings for individual signs in this. This is just an astrological overview. So let's see here. Any other questions about this material that we have gone over today? Let me see what we have in January real quick. So when the Sun aligns with Saturn, that's going to be very interesting. And also we have Uranus going direct. Where did it go? On January 6th. And then we have a solar eclipse on January 5th, which is my birthday, by the way. Has me a little concerned about my birthday this year. It's like there's going to be an eclipse on my birthday, then Uranus goes direct the day after my birthday. And, well, of course, it's also a new moon. All right, so, you answered everything I was wanting to know about. Good, good. I'm not doing any readings for any signs. I'm gonna have to start putting that in the title of these streams, I think. Have to get me something for my birthday. Thank you. That would be so nice. So, I don't know. Should I talk about some of the stuff in early January, or should I save it for when we do a stream on that? So I don't want to complicate matters here. Happy New Year's to you as well, Connor. Well, I guess that's about it then. Like I would stay on longer, but like I told you guys earlier, like I'm not in the best vibration today. So I think I'm gonna get off now and go deal with some stuff. But as always, I will be back on Saturday with another tarot stream. We'll be analyzing the strength card. That should be fun. And then I'll be back on Monday for another Seth stream, analyzing Seth Speaks. And then next Wednesday, I'm not sure what we're going to be doing just yet, but I'll figure that out, and then we will do it, and then I'll stream. Can I tell you why your door closed on you? You did not close it. I have no idea. There may be some intense spiritual or psychic energy about, or a ghost or something. I don't know. Or it could just be the wind, depending on the conditions. Have a good night. Thanks for the stream. Same to you, little laughing mug. Hope you have a good night, and you're very welcome. Thank you guys for being here. Thanks for everyone else who has been here. I always love talking about astrology. And sorry I couldn't stay longer, but I've got some stuff I've got to go tend to. So I'll see you guys. Let me fix that blur. I'll see you guys hopefully on Saturday for more delightful investigating of occult knowledge.